Welcome to another episode of Creative Leaders Unplugged, a podcast brought to you by Future Skills Academy. I'm Morgan with Arna, and today we talk to Karen Hold.
Yes, Karen. I really liked, well, actually, there were so many things I liked. The story of her husband's grandfather
Hmm.
I mean, I have to look, I want to look him up. He's
Yes.
like this amazing person that invented so many awesome things. Anyway, anyway, beside that, the idea that she's such a typical sort of, I don't know what to call that, rich person, someone who connects different worlds because she experienced these different worlds, right? And to me, it's so exciting to go like, oh yeah, right. I see it. I see you. Yeah, I see you from, you
Hmm.
came from this world and you met someone from that world and you said, hey, I'm going to take a little bit of this and going to take a bit of that,
Yeah.
and I make it my own, and I don't know, and it's such a, yeah, I love that. I love that because that's what we're kind of, I think, discovering in this podcast is those kind of people are out there. There are many of them,
Hmm.
and they are really important because they are sort of the innovators. They are the designers on a sort of meta level, not the innovators on the products or the kind of the stuff they invent, but on this meta level of collaboration and
Yeah,
bringing, right, and bringing people together.
exactly. And like looking at systems or how things are done. And she talked about cowboys at one point,
Yeah.
and that metaphor has kind of stuck with me. My dad loved cowboys growing up, right? So we always had a lot of cowboy pictures in the basement. But kind of just this being this person who's out there.
Sorry. Yeah. So go. Sorry. Go back. You had a lot of cowboy pictures in the basement. Sorry, that's a weird sentence. But what? Sorry, what?
When you put it like that. So
Explain. Exactly. Explain.
first off, we have basements in America, and the Netherlands not always.
I know. That's right.
First part.
If I would have a basement, and there were a lot of cowboy pictures, my kids would think weird things of me. They go,
Well,
Dad?
but the basement's like in the States, the basement is like the place to hang out. We had half of it was kind of finished. There was carpet, like we had like a pool table down there, the like a TV where we
Ah,
could hang out. So it's kind of like the
right.
chill area.
Right,
And the
right, right,
other
right,
half was not finished, but that's where my dad had the workshop. So he
right.
could, build things and work on things. And
Right.
so he kind of got to decorate it more in a style that worked for him because it was his
Right.
space, right? And so he had a
Yeah.
bunch of like black and white pictures of John Wayne riding a cool horse,
Yeah.
these different
Yeah. Sure, sure.
cowboys riding off into the sunset.
A man cave.
A man cave, yes. But I mean,
But
I
your dad is a superhero. So yeah.
was
Yeah.
but my mom had her sewing stuff down there too. If she wanted to go work on something, she'd go down there too. So it
Yeah.
didn't feel as
Cool.
much like a man cave, but definitely the part of the house where my dad hung out more, yeah.
Yeah.
But back to cowboys and Karen, she was talking about like this idea of being a cowboy and kind of
Hmm.
being an innovator and going out and doing things in a new way. And,
Yeah.
and that also is kind of the image that I'm starting to see emerge with these people that we're talking to, because cowboys did not hang out with a bunch of other cowboys. They maybe there was two of them, but it's not like you
Hmm.
brought your whole team of cowboys to go settle the West. It was, no, there's me and I'm gonna go out. And
Right.
was, just it was more of like a solitary thing. And of course you bump into somebody else who's doing a similar thing and there's an instant connection, right? So she's written this book,
Mm.
Jean Litka, and they're both kind of these people that can bridge worlds and find these
Right.
connections in unlikely places. And
Hmm.
so they make a really great team. And I can imagine that if we throw Karen into a room with any of the other podcast guests, that they would instantly find a connect because they're all kind of doing this thing. It's kind of maybe a bit lonely at times.
Hmm.
You don't always have a whole team of other people doing the exact same thing. But I think there's also kind of like a real adventure,
Yeah.
but also a
Well,
beauty.
Yeah, I think it's about this mindset of being an explorer and not so much a
Mhm.
discoverer. So if you're a discoverer, you discover you have a goal, you
True.
discover a thing. But if you're an explorer, anything can happen. It's about the exploration. It's about the path. It's about the road. It's
Yeah.
about it's not so much about
Experimentation.
yeah, you'll
True.
discover all kinds of things, but you're not focused on something. So this idea of you know, that's also part of, something she shared after we stopped recording about the immersing yourself
Hmm.
into a world, and that is the important part, right? Because if you want to
Yes.
change, you have to do things, you have to immerse yourself. Otherwise, you cannot build empathy.
Yeah.
So you need to. So that's part of. I guess that's part of that mindset of you
Yeah.
have to go and go out and do it and be there and be part of that world and immerse yourself in it in order to build empathy with it, but really understand it.
Hmm. And she said something that I wrote down. That was the moment where I was like, I gotta get a pen to create. She said, to create something new, you have to become someone new.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. And
Yes.
yeah, goes with
I,
the
I I
empathy.
have I have nothing else to say that is smarter than that. So so I think we're just gonna have to listen to the conversation.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So the boys they have a plan. We should find out
I
and
don't think
stop.
they have a plan. Don't give them that much credit. I think they are reactive.
I don't know. They found another route. They found another way to kind of conquer the world again, and we should stop them. What are they doing? Skill building secretly?
I
You know,
hope so.
are they
I
gathering
hope so.
somewhere? Where are
Uh,
they if they're not going to school?
right?
Don't trust them. That's
Right, but
my.
they could be, right? And so
Hmm.
all those alternative skill building academies that
Hmm.
are popping up
Yes,
are
true.
serving as alternative educational
Yeah,
routes.
yeah. That
And
is very interesting.
in the United States, I think there's also movements to remove degrees as obstacles to employment. So, because they're
Mhm.
especially in government, federal jobs and state jobs, I think you have to have a university degree for some jobs. And so there's
Right.
a movement to remove that obstacle to allow students
Yeah.
who have not been able to get to college, who have been skilled through alternative routes to be able to
Mm.
get jobs because those jobs are going unfulfilled
Right.
and there are people with skills who can
That makes
perform those
sense.
jobs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That makes sense. Speaking as a boy without any diploma, because I never finished any school, which is interesting because I love learning and I always learned and I love reading and and so and by working and getting experience and et cetera, you learn so much. So I always felt it was odd that school sort of owned that learning space.
Yeah.
Like
Right,
that's you only learn at school. We're like, no, you don't.
right.
You learn all the time, continuously. And I always felt it was so weird that the school told me you have to read these books for your whatever test or exam or what have you. And I couldn't read other books because that felt to me that wasn't learning because I had to read these books from school. But I was interested in other things, but that was a waste of time because school told me to read
Yes.
that list.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting how that's a really interesting what you're saying is that I do think that there are, you know, if you want to hire someone and they have the right skills and they are the right person, the right personality, I mean, why would that lack of a diploma stop you from hiring that person? That makes no sense because, in a way, the diploma doesn't say that much. It's like getting your driver's license, and then the first time you get into a car alone, you're like, oh, you can't drive. And you were just sharing the story of your daughter. You think, you go to work and you think that they know,
Right.
as if they know. what to
Right.
do. They don't know, right? So even they
Right.
have diplomas, they've been working, they work at this company, and they still don't know. So then
Right.
you're new and you go to this company, so there's so much learning continuously. So I totally agree with that. I mean, I have nothing against getting a diploma, by the way. So if my
Right.
daughter's listening, my kids are listening, get your diploma. Well, but because it is kind of it's a way of learning to deal with obstacles and
Mhm.
and also learning to do the things you don't like to do, you have to do, and that's also part of life and part of work, right? So I think there's nothing wrong with it, and learning how to learn in different ways, that's also really good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and the time you spend with with other students, and that, which is awesome, right? So
Yes.
there's all kinds of benefits to it socially and intellectually for sure. But yeah, it's really interesting how that is changing. I knew that was changing for adults. So because you can get all these these skill building courses, and there are all these different schools that are popping up. But yeah, now you mentioned it. Actually, it is. Yeah, you see them for young people as well everywhere.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
and
really
that
fascinating.
that just doing the activities, doing reports, doing research papers doesn't necessarily mean that you are experiencing the shift in mindsets that we want you to have to really become someone new
Mm,
in the process, right? You might be able to just check the box that you're doing the report, but you may not actually be immersing yourself in that research to problem solve and to become curious, which are the skills that we want you to take away from that experience, right?
yeah,
And curiosity is a skill that can be learned, and that is a valuable skill for any organization.
yeah.
But a degree doesn't necessarily mean that you're curious, doesn't necessarily mean that you're empathetic, doesn't
No.
necessarily mean that you can experiment. Well, these are all the things that are important to me as an innovator, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Have
you
you?
learn how to deal with the system and survive. I mean, that's also pretty cool. Obviously, you know how to kind of navigate through a system that
Mhm.
is somewhat hostile to you because they're testing you all the time.
Right,
We
right,
told you this a couple of weeks ago, and now we're
right,
gonna test if you remembered. And
right.
you're like, and while you're going through, puberty and all that stuff, and the worst time in life to
Yeah,
focus on, you know
yeah,
so and then you do all these tests, and they test you when you're actually really way more interested in other kids.
yeah,
Right, it's so
yeah.
funny.
I So, Morgan, I have a 20-year-old daughter, and as a mother, I wanted to build her skills, and especially as an innovator and a designer, I wanted to
Mhm.
build her skills at a very early age. And so we kept 9 journals. And I don't think we've ever even talked about this. We kept 9 journals in her childhood. We don't do them anymore because she's an adult, but 9 journals to help build skills like curiosity, because I wanted her to show up in the world being
Mhm.
curious, but you need practice to do
Mhm.
that. So she would have a curious question every night at bed, and then we would go and look up that curious question. And by the way, the Egyptians invented everything because we have looked up who invented lipstick, who invented the dog leash.
No way,
And
really?
I've learned a lot. Yes. And I've learned
Huh.
all these really interesting things from this curiosity journal, but we kept one for resilience, how to bounce back, because in second grade, girls have issues in class, and you need to have the skills to be able to
Mm.
recognize the emotions that you're feeling, give
Mhm.
yourself permission to feel those emotions, and then keep an inventory. She didn't have this language, but this is what we were doing. Keep an inventory of ways to bounce back so that you become more resilient in the process. And, by the time she was in 6th grade, 7th grade, middle school years, she had so much practice bouncing back that it's really easy for her to do. And we still use that language today. If something happens, we still use that language. I used to keep this because she didn't know what emotions were when she was in second grade, but you can find emotion faces on the internet. And
Mhm.
so I printed it out and put it in our journal, and she would look at the faces and say, I'm feeling this. And her
Ah.
favorite one was disgusted. So, she was like, "Arr." So she said, I'm feeling disgusted, mommy. But she was able to name it
Mhm.
and then give herself permission to feel that and then bounce back. Yeah, anyhow. So I kept 9 journals in her childhood, and
That's amazing.
courage and curiosity and all these journals to just help give her the space to practice these skills that I thought would be really important for her as
That's
a young
brilliant.
woman.
That's
Yeah.
That's brilliant. No, I'm so sad I didn't know that. Now I'm too late. So she's
Well,
already.
with your 12-year-old, I mean,
Yeah.
we
Yes.
kept adding journals. So we didn't start with 9, right? We started when she was 3. I started with a gratitude journal because I read, my go-to when I am trying to problem solve is to read. And
Mhm.
as a new parent, it's a very overwhelming responsibility to launch a child into the world. I felt like it was an overwhelming responsibility. So I used to read a
Mhm.
lot. And there's lots of neuroscience that says that the brain, just like we were saying, the brain is so elastic. And you
Mhm.
can literally make your child happier by practicing gratitude. And so I thought, oh, sign me up. We are starting a gratitude journal. And so
Mhm.
we started when she was 3, keeping a gratitude journal. And she was grateful when she was 3 for like her teddy bear and her dolls and, simple things. But by the time she's an 18-year-old, it's deep. She recognizes I'll get emotional. She recognizes the deep love that her parents have for her, and has an appreciation for the education that she was able to receive, and has such a profound appreciation for life that has developed over all these years of her childhood.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
That's really
Yeah.
cool. And is this something, because you said you were maybe feeling overwhelmed, right, with the task of raising a child,
Yes.
equipping them for the world. Were these things that came to you like naturally, like, oh, well, you said, you were reading, but, or was this something that you also like this kind of helping hand in a way, right? Like, was this something that you also experienced growing up and you're like, oh, I want to make sure that my daughter.
Yeah. Yeah. I was always told as a child I was too emotional. So the bounce back journal was very much rooted in my own personal experience as a child, wanting to give my daughter the space to name emotions and have the permission to feel them, and also recognize emotions out in the world.
Mm,
So before we even started, so when she was in 6th grade and they started talking about courage at school, she didn't know what courage was. And how do you understand courage unless you start to notice it? So we started keeping a courageous journal so that she could notice when she was feeling courageous, and it helped her notice courage in other people.
mm,
And so we would write down those things. So that was very much rooted in my own childhood, giving her permission to feel those things. But the journals were sort of organic. So the gratitude journal came first. The bounce back journal came because she was having issues in second grade and needed a place to process that. We kept a kindness journal so that she could just mark down the moments when people were kind to her that she wanted to remember, or that she was kind to someone else. But they were all organic. The courageous journal was one, the curiosity journal was one. I thought, I really need to build curiosity. I need to give her practice being curious. So they were all organic. Yeah.
that's really cool. We had
Just
a,
in being a mother. Yeah.
yeah, well, and it's funny because my mom also had one of the journals she kept for us was our idea book. And it would be anytime me or my brothers came up with a crazy idea,
Yeah.
We would try explaining it to her, right? Like it's this armband, but then you hit this button and it does this, and then you have wings and then you can fly. And so she would always make us draw it in the idea book first.
Oh, I
And
love
then we could
that.
come to her with a picture and then explain the idea and everything. And
Right.
it was later when I was in industrial design school, I was like, oh, I know how I got here.
Right.
But it was funny because I think it was coming out of her, not frustration, but she, to follow a child's verbal explanation of something
Mm.
isn't always easy. But then by her having a picture and us explaining it, it really kind of unlocked. And now all three of us, me and my brothers, were all makers or creators of some kind, So
Wow. And that deliberate practice from a very early age. Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Amazing.
funny. My daughter, so now I'm like, So she actually, so this year she had to write a paper on a specific topic of her own choice, and she chose emotions. So she wrote a paper on emotions. So she was like, "I'll do it then." Probably since I did not have a journal on emotions for her. She was like, because she said, I'm going to write about emotions because then maybe I'll start understanding mine.
Mm.
Mm.
So like,
Wow.
very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So because, if you go through, if you, as a teenager, if you go through puberty and all that, I mean, that's so complicated. So, it's interesting how at least I kind of I mean now with my children I see it, I recognize it, and I go like, oh, so my son is 12 and so he's kind of getting into it now. My daughter's getting out of it, so it's because she's turning 18, so she's slowly turning into an adult, and it's interesting to see that shift because all of a sudden she can say things. And I'm not sure if I can find an example, but just very simple things that all of a sudden she sounds like this adult. She's like, oh, it's like, oh yeah, I don't know. There was something going on, and I was a bit not really angry, but a bit like she promised something to herself and she didn't do it, and all of a sudden she was like, oh, Dad, I'm sorry. You're right. I'm sorry. That was silly of me. But the way she said it was like, "Oh, you're just now you're like an equal to me."
Mm.
Wow, this is amazing, amazing
Yeah.
self-reflection and just saying it, and that's really something that I don't know if I practiced that, but I mean, we're human, so I made mistakes, and I always kind of made sure that I shared that and said sorry if I made a mistake or I did silly things. I was angry for the wrong reason because I was tired and I was like grumpy and I like, and like, and I have to kind of come back to that later because I know, no, I have to come back to this and I have to explain that and say sorry because I want them to be able to say sorry too. And
Mm.
that just, and so my kids are good at saying sorry when because otherwise it just keeps kind of within you and you feel like bad about something and you haven't and then if you can talk about it and make it explicit and just talk about it, it disappears and it's fine because
Mm.
it's not, it wasn't intentional or it was just, things happen
Right.
when you live in the same house and, everybody's busy and stuff happens. So
Right.
I think being an example, right, and how you act, and I think that's so, so important. I think, and a lot of the conversations we have on this podcast are really about origin stories. It
Mhm.
is about, because where you came from, what you've experienced, the way you were brought up, your parents, but also just, going to school, all these transitional moments, they kind of shape you, right? And you can really, like that's why it's really cool what you're saying. You can be really, really conscious with your kids, shaping these experiences and helping them realize certain things and or give them language for it, which is so important because that shapes your reality.
Mm.
But other things just happen to you. You can't design everything. You can't manage everything. There's accidental things that happen to you, but how to deal with that is so important. But anyway, so this origin story, I think that's really important because it also shows, and that's why this podcast is so interesting for us to kind of have these interviews because although we talk to a lot of people who say I'm an innovator or I'm a creative, it's not like all these people are the same. There are patterns. There are certain patterns, but
Yeah.
they all grew up totally different. They all had different experiences. So you can't copy it. So if you want someone to become a creative problem solver, for instance, you can't go, okay, so what are the 10 things creative problem
Right.
solvers do? No,
Yes.
it's not like how they have a coffee in the morning and then they read a newspaper and they go, no, it's not, it
Right.
doesn't work that way, right? So, and you called yourself an innovator a couple of times already. And I'm interested in just, I mean, because I don't know about that for myself, but do you kind of know where, or when did you start calling yourself an innovator? Like when does someone go like, I'm an innovator? I mean, is that, no, it's seriously, I
Well,
mean, where does that
yeah.
happen?
Yeah. Well, my journey is circuitous. I studied public policy in university. So I
We're
wasn't
all waiting to
trained
start. Yes.
as wasn't trained as a designer. Jean, who you just had on the podcast, was trained as an accountant. She
Hmm.
was not trained as a designer. So I studied public policy, but I married into, so my path has two very distinct kind of paths that intersected, that allowed for this aha moment of design to sort of enter my vocabulary. The one path is I married into a family of designers. So my husband's grandfather was Leroy Grumman, who founded Grumman Aerospace, which is a large aviation company in the aerospace company in the United States, and very successful during World War II, building planes for the Navy. And he used the language of prototyping and visual presencing of his ideas to communicate and and share his work with the world. He was a very quiet, introverted person. So he didn't use language, an auditory language, to communicate his ideas. He built his ideas. And one of the most famous examples of that is that the Secretary of the Navy, we were losing the war in the South Pacific, and the Secretary of the Navy came to Grandpa and said, how can we get more planes on aircraft carriers? All planes at that point had fixed wings. And so there's limited space on aircraft carriers for the number of planes that could fit on the aircraft carrier. So they needed to figure out how to get more planes on aircraft carriers so they could get more planes up in the air. And the obvious answer was to fold the wing. But what happened was there's pesky little pins that had to be put in when you unfolded the wing. And if a Navy seaman forgot to put the pin in, then the wing would fall off. So he had to, and this happened. So they had to figure out how to get more plane. They had to figure out how to fold this wing up, but do it without a pin. And so with an eraser and two paper clips, Grandpa was able to visualize that if you could fold the wing back like the wing of a bird, like a pivot, then you could maintain the structural component which allowed the wing to stay on, and then lock it in place without a wing. But he did this using an eraser and two paper clips, and he used a visual language. So he wasn't talking through his idea. He was building, making, showing his idea to his collaborators. He was at the head of the table. There were 30 of his most brilliant engineers sitting at the table with him, and they're all discussing, and he was just taking in all of their brilliance and tinkering at the end of the table. And when he put this prototype on the table, everyone knew instantly what this design could do for the design of this aircraft. And then they made a proper model and took it to the Secretary of the Navy, and instantly he was able to understand with this proper model of the plane. But this was all done with this visual language because he really did not use an auditory, he wasn't deaf or dumb. He just didn't use an auditory language to communicate his ideas. He built his ideas. And
Right.
my mother-in-law was the same way. Color, line, and form was her favorite course in university. She loved
Mhm.
design. And my father was a lawyer, so he talked for a living, and he wrote briefs for a living. But my home that I grew up in was very different from my husband's home, because his family was much, much more quiet and used design to communicate, which was like stepping into an alien world.
Mhm.
It was a world that they knew and they were very comfortable with, but it was a world that I didn't know anything about. And I had never fathomed building my ideas to communicate versus talking about my ideas. So I married into this family, and my husband's cousin was a brilliant keel designer. He designed keels for Dennis Conner for the America's Cup sailboats.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so he also built his ideas and was a brilliant designer. So, it wasn't just grandpa, it was this family of designers that I married into. So I married into this family. And then I had this really important moment in my professional career when I was at P&G working on the Folgers coffee brand in the early 90s. And Folgers was the number one coffee brand at that time. Maxwell House was number two. Starbucks was a $165 million business in the Pacific Northwest, but we were close to $1 billion brand. And the younger members of our brand team all knew that there was something to this Starbucks experience that was happening in the Pacific Northwest that we should be paying attention to as the biggest coffee brand. But our senior executives were the coffee people. They knew coffee. They were the experts, and they decided or believed that no one would pay $5 for a cup of coffee. And this activity that was happening in the Pacific Northwest was sort of a regional thing that wasn't mainstream, that it was just kind of an offshoot of coffee. It wasn't really going to be the coffee experience. We managed to send a plane load of executives out to Seattle, and they drove around to different coffee shops and came back to Cincinnati, our headquarters, and decided to do nothing. We didn't run
Mhm.
experiments. We didn't do any more customer discovery research. We didn't give those customers the benefit of the doubt that they were having a set of experiences that were different from our consumers of coffee, and try to understand what those experiences were so that we might deliver something. So I left P&G, but that experience, I knew in my heart that we were missing
Mm.
something, that we should have experimented, that we should have invested in immersing ourselves in that consumer behavior to
Mhm.
unlock what potential we might have been able to leverage for our own brand.
Mhm.
So fast forward 30 years, Starbucks is a $26 billion business. Folgers is a $2 billion business. Starbucks creates 13 times the economic value that Folgers does. And in 2010, I found the language of design thinking that helped me explain what we should have done in that moment. And
Mhm.
every light bulb went off for me,
Mm.
thinking, if we had experimented, if we had immersed ourselves, things might be different, and Folgers might be in a different position than it is today. And it helped me put together all these pieces of design that I had sort of immersed myself into when I married into this family, and then this experience that I had at P&G that I couldn't explain or describe or understand for so long. And design gave me the language to do that.
So interesting how, anyway, I mean, I think a lot of people have sort of similar experiences because it's light bulbs. It's sort of like, it gave me language to something I already kind of felt or I kind of knew, and so we need we need language, because if you have the words, all of a sudden it's there. And if you don't have the words, it's so fascinating. There's this book by Susan Scheller. It's called Man Without Words, I think. I ran this design thinking conference. She spoke at the conference years ago. But anyway, the book is really interesting because it poses, and actually there's also a Radio Lab has an episode on language that has her on as well. And it's all about language and words. And there's this moment. So in this book, she describes how she meets this boy who is deaf and never learned to speak a sign language. There's so no language, and he doesn't know language. And just that is already like no language. What do you mean? So she was kind of baffled by that, and she took it upon herself to teach him sign language. And then, but he just basically copied everything she did. So he didn't understand words. So when she gave him the sign for book, he just basically opened a book, and she was like, "No, that's the word for book." And then she realized, oh, he doesn't know words. Oh, how to deal with that? And anyway, she long story short, she managed, and she asked him that. So he learned sign language, and then she could ask him obviously questions. They could have conversations, and she asked him also things like, "What were you thinking before you knew words?" And he said, "I wasn't." And to me, that was like boom, like what? What do you mean? Yeah.
Wow.
And so this whole idea, if you don't have the word for thinking, then are you thinking?
Mm.
What's happening? And so, and in the episode of the Radio Lab, there's another lady, and she has a TED talk about, it's called a stroke of insight. She has a stroke,
Oh, right.
right? And so she tells about how she loses her language because it hits that part in the brain that kind of controls language. And then when that kind of disappears, she experiences everything unfiltered, right? So she's in the hospital, and she looks outside the window, and there's grass, and there's blue sky and sun, and it's a lovely day. And when you have words, you think, oh, it's a lovely day, beautiful, the sun's out, oh, that was
Yeah.
nice. But if you don't have those words, it just kind of enters you unfiltered. And she was asked, if you could choose between these two things, like having language and or just experiencing things
Mm.
unfiltered, what would you choose? And she said, that's a tough choice,
Mm.
because it's amazing, because everything kind of melts into one. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was like, wow. And if you think about it, that is what language does. It's also a barrier. It is a way of distributing good things and bad things. It's not just good things. It's not just good ideas. So
Right.
managing your language and I mean, that's how memes, kind of travel. Ideas have no conscious, and words are the way they are distributed and grow, and which is so fascinating. So
Right.
you're feeling like, oh, I have a language, and I can now, all of a sudden it opens all these doors. But it's not just, so we shouldn't underestimate the fact that it's the language. It's not that it wasn't there before, but there was something, obviously, because the people you were working with at the coffee company, I mean, that company started somewhere. There was a first, there was one or two people probably who invented that company as well. So there's also a root to that company so to me, it's always like, how did they forget? Because they started a lot of the companies we work for now. It's also some companies I work for at this moment, they struggle with innovation. But actually, if you go back to their roots, to where they started, it was all experiment and
Mm.
trying and failing
Right.
and
Right.
messing about. And
Right.
how did that happen?
Well, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I never thought about the doing, and I'm thinking to design thinking. I have a lot of thoughts going on in my own head right now. A lot of thoughts bouncing around, but the framework of design thinking being a roadblock to people actually experiencing what those tools are designed to help them experience so that they can become someone new. So I don't want to forget that thought, but so much of what we do is helping companies and helping individual employees in the companies move from a place where they're self-centering and company centering to a place where they are customer centered, other centered. Because when companies get big, the activity begins to organize around efficiency and serving the company, and they lose that focus on the customer as the people they're serving. So they've fallen in love with their company and continuing the efficiency of and the revenue stream of the company, and they've lost some of raison d'etre for their services at all in the first place. And so much of what we do is helping people practice new behaviors to move them from where they are to a new place where they can become more other-centered, which is why a lot of our work in design thinking is no longer focused on the tools and the methods and the processes, because we found that that was becoming a roadblock to people actually unlocking the full potential of those tools. The tools almost become weaponized because people expect that if you fill out a journey map, then you're going to get good results. No, journey maps are created by people. And unless you are experiencing something different in the process, you are becoming inspired by the data that you're collecting and becoming more confident as a team and aligning on what you think the problem to be solved is, you can't develop a new solution. So just checking the box and creating a journey map doesn't guarantee you good results. And Jean and I found so much in our work that people were relying on tools.
Yeah.
And in order to create something new, you need to become someone new in the process. And we needed to be able to create some language, some new language for what we wanted people to be experiencing so that they could create something new in the process, which is what we wrote about in Experiencing Design.
Yeah. It reminds me of this phrase that naming is framing. You know, and for you, it was this light bulb moment, like, okay, there's this thing that I experienced with, the coffee and these weird people in the Pacific Northwest going crazy over this $5 cup of coffee.
Which I still don't believe, by the way, that you pay that much money. I still, if I go to, if I go to Starbucks, I still don't believe I actually pay that. I go like, did I just pay that? Yes, you did pay that much
Yes,
money
you
for a
did.
cup of coffee.
You are happy to do so. I walked by the Starbucks Experience Center in January. I was there for New Year's. There was a line out the door, Arna, of people waiting to get into this experience center. But like, as you were saying, Karen, the naming is framing. For you, it was this light bulb moment. Now I can put words and understanding around this thing that I felt, but I couldn't necessarily articulate. But then it's also kind of becoming this maybe a double-edged sword, right? Because, innovation is journey mapping. So do the journey map and I've innovated. Well, not entirely.
Not entirely. Not
Yeah, but
entirely.
it's safe. It's safe. So I think the problem is that we have raised people, from when they went, when they were kids went to through school, in wanting to kind of know, first of all, tell me what to do, what should I know, and what is the answer I should give? How do I? So they're getting tested all the time, and so in a company, they don't feel safe. So if you tell them, like, the tool is just, I tell people this all the time. I always say, when I have like a framework, like a double diamond or whatever tool I use, I say, someone just made that up, right? First of all, it's just a bunch of people who said, could do it like this, So feel the permission, you have the permission to change it, to add it, to add stuff to it, but it's in a way, people think, yeah, that's great. They get it. I mean, people are smart enough, they get it. But if you do so, it becomes yours, and it's your ownership and your responsibility. That makes you vulnerable. And I mean, I did a project for a company just a couple of months ago, and there was a moment where they had to report to their manager about what they were doing in the training, and it was very much about self development, and so a lot of vulnerable moments were there, and they did not want to report everything because they said, I'm not going to share everything because I don't know what they're going to do with the information, in the
Mm,
future. I
yeah.
might like my boss now, but next week there's someone else there, and so there is a distrust, a deep distrust, when you work at a company, even though you like everyone, but the system, you never know what's going to happen next week, right? That feeling. So you can't, it's so much easier when people say, here's a journey map, just tick the box
Yes.
and, go, and there you go. And it's not your fault. I call that Prince 2 thinking, by the way. So this, project management tool that nobody knows what it does. You just you tick all the boxes and then bloop, there's the outcome. And it's not your fault. You can say, well, the machine said it, I used all the handbooks and I did the whole thing. And then all of a sudden, yeah, it's not my fault. That's so nice. So it takes courage. So your point of, it's about attitude, and it's about, mindset, and it's about behavior, but that's the hardest thing for people to change.
Mhm.
And also a lot of the design thinking kind of, workshops, and people teach design thinking, and the stuff you see online are not focused on that, because it's
Right.
really hard to sell it as well, because people are like, that's scary. you
I
know
don't want to change. I just want a new tool.
yeah, just give me a
I'm
tool,
Well,
man.
well, and as Jean would say, a bad journey map is better than no journey map. So, right, I'm not saying the tools are not valuable, but I think they're, 3 years ago when the book came out, and 5 years ago when we were sort of percolating it all, there was this backlash against design thinking. Like, design thinking is not living up to
Yeah.
what it advertises, right? And I think our contribution to the body of knowledge is, you know what, there are these behaviors that go along with these tools that are the way to unlock the power. And we named 44 specific behaviors that allow you to unlock the potential of these tools. And so
Yes.
for us, just contributing that to the conversation on design, we felt was valuable to help people understand, if their work is not achieving what they hope it would achieve, that they have something to look back at and say, okay, are
Mhm.
we treating our ideas as hypotheses to be tested? Or are we so attached to our ideas that we can't find the assumptions behind them to find out what has to be true? Right.
Mm.
So at least
Mhm.
we feel we've given people some language,
Yeah.
some awareness of the specific behaviors that we think contribute to design success.
Yeah. And you did. Yeah. I mean, these kind of, that language, that is so important, because it really does help people to not just to understand, because often people understand, but it's also to kind of to share that with their colleagues and say, hey, there's a word, and it's real. There's
Right.
language around this, and there's people writing about this, and again, it's about permission, and that you feel you have permission to do that. And because,
Right.
I mean, everyone somehow, I mean, you have really talented creative people, but in general, people are creative. You go through life as a problem solver, really.
Mhm.
You have to fix things all the time, and they might not, be, yeah, it might seem like little things when you go through life, but actually, if you think about it, that's a big task. to get an income, to have a family, to have a house, to have a, all that stuff, insurance, and you're figuring out things all the time. So we are way more creative and way more creative problem solvers than we give ourselves credit. And it's just that we have these personas somehow that when then we go to work, and that's something I kind of I can't I just I it's hard to believe how sometimes at certain companies, a lot of companies actually, the employees are still treated as children in a way. They clock in and they clock out. You know, it's such a weird thing for me that as adults, you all of a sudden you don't want to have that ownership, or you don't want to kind of have that responsibility because it makes you vulnerable, not because you don't want to, but the system kind of punishes you if you behave the wrong way, or you make a mistake, or you try something that didn't work out, and like, but that's normal, that's life, that's what you do all the time. When you go home, that's how you do. That's how you when you cook a meal you've never cooked before, the first time it won't taste that great. Right. That's nobody's going to punish you if all is well, at least. And usually, if all is well in your household, nobody's going to punish
Gordon
you.
Ramsay over for dinner.
Yeah,
No.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Master chef.
yeah, in the unlikely event that Gordon Ramsay is your dinner guest, maybe then you'll be punished. But I bet you that if there's no camera, even Gordon Ramsay will not punish you for that mistake. He'll be kind. He'll say, "Oh, it's okay.
He'll call you a
Let's
burnt piece
try."
of toast behind your back. It'll be fine.
That's interesting. Yeah, will he do that at home? Yeah. Anyway,
But most companies are not learning environments, right?
No.
They're in execution
exactly,
mode, right?
exactly.
And at home, when you're trying a new recipe, it's a learning
Yeah.
moment, right? And
Exactly.
so you have the permission to try a recipe
Yes.
and fail, because it usually does not work the first time.
So that's the problem. So no,
That's
but
the
that's the
problem. That's
thing.
a huge
That's it.
problem, right?
So companies are in no learning environments, so they
Right.
have to become learning environments, because in a way it's also really that's a paradox, because it's actually not true, because they are learning environments. Of course they're learning environments, but
Right.
they're toxic learning environments, which is worse. Right?
Yeah.
It's the worst thing to be like, you have to learn, now. Be creative now. Be innovative now.
Right.
Do something different now. Change behavior now. Here's some new tools. Do it now. Make more money now. Learn how to deal with this new market environment. Here's AI. Put it in our stuff now. And everybody is like, I don't know how to deal with it. Make no mistakes though.
Right.
Because like what
Right.
that's so that's I think that is the point, just what you said, that's the difference. We're not in a learning environment, and that is the problem, because we are animals that learn. We need to learn by falling
Yeah.
down and getting up again. That's how we do. So it's like a weird kind of trick. We said the way we learn as human beings is by falling down and getting up. Now we're going to put you in this environment, and we're going to ask you to learn something, but you can't fall down.
Right.
And
That's
then we go like,
exactly right.
"Oh, I
Right.
I don't know what to do."
Right. Not only can you not fall down, you don't have the permission to even consider
Yeah, exactly.
getting something wrong.
Yeah,
So there is a
exactly.
drive to there's a drive to self-centering, like, because your identity gets wrapped up kind of perversely in thinking you are smart and you have the answer and you create good things and you have the skill, talent, and ability to create something right the first time. So when there is learning needed, prototyping, experimentation, it is the antithesis of what an organization identifies with, because they identify as problem solvers who get it right the first time, who have the answers. And
Yeah.
and so we lose the ability to manage our risk and to manage any learning at all through experimentation and prototyping. And
And
we
now I'm thinking
know
of your
those
daughter.
skills are so
Now I'm
important.
thinking of your daughter doing her internship. for the first time going into this,
Right.
this serious internship, and then realizing like, oh, they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just collection of people and who may not necessarily have all the answers.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about like the concept of experts lately, right? Like everyone wants to be seen as an expert on something, right? Hire me, bring me to your next lecture because I'm the expert in this. And there was somebody that made a really thoughtful post. They're like, I want an expert in not knowing to show us the way and how that we can live a life full of not knowing. And I think there's got to be like a lot of trust in that, right? I know myself that I don't have the answers. Your daughter's learning, okay, these people who I thought were experts are maybe less experts than I thought. And and
Yeah.
but if we can trust more our own ability, hey, I don't have the answers, but I trust that I can get up again, that I can find the next step. But selling that to an organization uh is very tough.
It is.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But I mean, the behaviors and the skills that we need to equip teams with in order to be able to build new are these important skills around experimentation and presencing your ideas, visualizing your ideas so that those visual artifacts can spark better conversations rather than allowing people to just think about ideas in their heads and never turning them into anything concrete. It's about being able to have that reflection capability, that reflection skill in recognizing what your role is and how that impacts other people and bringing those diverse perspectives into the whatever it is you're creating. And yeah, it's so important. So
Yeah.
important.
I'm
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of them because you said that you grew up like your father was a lawyer, you grew up in a very different environment, and then,
Mhm.
met your husband. It was kind of transported or the door opened into this designer
Right.
not creative way of being and thinking. So was there any like hesitation that you had to like then fully immerse yourself into this new way of being a professional, or were you like, oh no, this is the answer, let's go?
So there was no hesitation because there wasn't a single moment. It was by osmosis and it happened over such a long period of time. So, and what I didn't tell you was that my husband and I, so I left P&G and my husband and I started our own company and we started a newsletter business. This is the 90s, right before the internet. So we started a newsletter business and we were covering the emerging telecommunications market, the emerging, well,
Oh,
I should
wow.
say the emerging networking market.
Right.
Telecommunications obviously existed, but we were covering
Yeah.
in the go-go years in the 90s, we were covering, all the big companies, Alcatel and Lucent and all the big companies and startups, many startups that were building the internet that we have today. And so, as you can imagine, many of those companies were in Silicon Valley, and we covered all of these startups. And the single difference between the companies that succeeded, because so many companies were funded during the 90s, it was just crazy money flow, deal flow everywhere. The single biggest difference was the design that the companies had for their product or service. And so there was this other kind of path into design that I got to see through these brilliant designers and engineers that were building products to build the internet. And so I got to interact with all of those designers because we were interviewing them for our newsletter and we were interviewing them for our publications. And so I got to see how they thought and operated in the world. And, they had Wizard of Oz boxes that would show up at trade shows. They were just blinking lights. There was nothing, there
Hmm.
was no guts in them, but you saw how important those prototypes were to be able to have better conversations with the press like us and with their customers.
It's
There
your
was
grandfather.
no technology behind it, right?
Yeah.
But they needed those prototypes in order to have better conversations with
Yeah.
everyone, with the entire ecosystem that was helping build the internet.
That's your grandfather, right? Again,
Well, yeah, my
with the
husband's grandfather,
paperclip.
but yeah,
Yeah.
the paper clips and the eraser.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. That's funny how that is it's also a pattern where because we're human beings. I mean,
right.
you keep forgetting that. And I actually just wrote a little article about this, that we kind of, we don't evolve as quick as technology is evolving. So humans are slow, in the way we evolve, and technology is very fast.
Mhm.
And so our needs and the way we kind of see reality, and the way we kind of need to communicate with each other, that doesn't hasn't changed. And so seeing a physical artifact is obviously still really important,
Yeah.
just as it was,
That's right.
a couple hundred years ago. I mean, it's not
Right.
nothing changed.
Right.
And so I think that's again, so I think so, also when we talk about sort of organizations and learning environments and 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 so I think that what we also do is we might not only give new language, but we give also language to start understanding very old behaviors,
Mm.
very, going back to our roots. I often feel that it's more about we forgot, so many things that are so important.
Right.
We
Right.
forgot about how storytelling is so important, how visualizing things, how making, physical artifacts, and how trying things out. And, we forgot. We kind of somehow are so easy to forget things. And it's great to be in the now, kind of like, but the now is not like the end. We always feel like this is the end of we are the sort of the crowning achievement of evolution. This is it. This is it. It's not getting any better. It's not, but we also forget. So it's that really interesting paradox in a way that there's so much new and so much change, and at the same time, we are still, Homo sapiens, like very basic needs, very basic. I always say there's just there's only a few real needs we have. And if we do like user research, for instance, like design research, and you look for sort of the underlying needs of people, the jobs to be done kind of research. If you dig down deep enough, there are just a bunch of those. It's about belonging. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself. Kind of this feeling. Community is. We're community kind of creatures, and we need to be healthy because it's about survival. So we want to be healthy, and we're trying to be happy. And that's hard. We don't
Right.
know how, but we're trying. So that's it. That's all.
Right.
That's all. And everything else is like, stuff that we use to get fulfill
Basic
those
needs.
needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all we
Yeah.
do. Whether it's a car or it's food or it's an insurance or a bank account, it's all about those things. And nothing changed. So if we can't address those, I was doing this work for a company, and they talked about why. So they needed to change sort of the role of a store manager, and the store manager needed to spend more time with the people in this shop, and they were doing a lot of admin, and they wanted to kind of create a way of not doing. And so I said, so why would they want to spend more time with, on the shop store floor? And they said, well, because that kind of they get more sales. I said, why do they want more sales? And they said, well, because that's when they might get promotion. I said, why do they want to have promotion? And I said, we all want to have promotion. I said, really? Like, that's interesting assumption. But why would they want that? It's more money. So why would they want more money? Well, because they have a family and it's security. I said, oh, that's interesting. So it's about actually family and security. So if you communicate with them, you might also consider that you're communicating about that as well to them
Mm.
if you want to change their role and change their behavior. That's also, it's all there, that, and so but we forget. We were like, oh yeah, it's about people. What do people want? And we think in systems and in products, and it's so weird that it's so difficult to get people to think about the human beings and the real human needs, not about, yeah, because then they buy more stuff. And why would
Well,
we
so
buy more stuff?
I'll tell you some other stories about Grandpa, because I think often when I tell people about the prototype that he created, the focus is on his brilliance as a designer, that he was able to, to take in all the engineering information and create this wing design, because that wing design actually completely revolutionized naval aviation. It was called the Stow Wing, and it was used on the Hellcat and the Avenger, which were really important planes. But it was the designerly activity of visualizing the ideas of everyone at that table that
Yeah.
was the designer behavior. The other designerly behaviors that he had was just being an incredible listener. So, two examples for you. One is that during World War II, most of the women that were building the plane, most of the employees that were building the planes were women, right? Because their husbands were off at war, and they were mothers with children. We didn't have disposable diapers in those days. So, and there were no men at home in case they had a flat tire, or, in case they left their oven on. So he created this little green truck that would go around and pick up women if they had a flat tire and help change their tire, or they would be dispatched to the house to turn their oven off if they had left their oven on before they came to the plant. And he created daycare centers at the plant so that their
Wow.
children could be taken care of. And they had diaper delivery service so that it made it easier for their home duties. But that was from walking the shop floor and being a listener, right? So that's another
Yeah.
designerly behavior, like immersing yourself into the needs of the people who are
Amazing.
your employees and surveying. So that's one story. And then the second story I'll tell you is that Grandpa was a Navy inspector before he founded his own company. And so it was his job. The Navy hired him to go around to their government contracts, and he's like the man on the spot to make sure that they're building what the Navy contracted the company to build for, and make sure everything was done. And he found, when he was in that role, that there was a lot of duplication of effort. There was a lot of complexity that extended the length of production time needed to produce the planes or produce whatever they were producing. And so he remembered that when he started his own company, and he stripped down the planes so they were not as complex to build, but they were also not as complex to fly, because the young men who were flying these planes were 17 and 18-year-old kids. And they had just learned how to drive tractors and cars. And if you made those planes so complicated, you were not able to get those planes up in the air and land successfully, because they're too complicated to fly for the young men that were flying them. He also, he put a steel plate behind the pilot's seat, because most enemy fire came from behind. And so if he had a steel plate, there might be a lot of bullets put in the plane, but the pilot would still survive. So they were able to save the life of the pilot. He experimented with self-healing fuel tanks, because most planes went down because the fuel tanks exploded. But if they were self-healing, then again, you could put a lot of holes in the plane, but the fuel tank wouldn't explode, and you might save the life of the pilot in the process. I could go on and on.
Wow.
But
That's
these are like the
amazing.
designerly behaviors
Yeah.
that I learned through osmosis, right? This is the
Yeah.
Yeah.
storytelling of a family
Yeah.
that
That's
helped me
amazing.
understand, wow, this is what design is. Designerly
Yeah.
behaviors are listening to the people that you're serving, being open to possibility, right? There's certainly things were going wrong with trying to fold those wings up, but he didn't give up. He was driven
Mm.
by possibility rather than driven by constraint.
I
And
had a
he
model
visualized
plane.
his ideas.
I had a model plane as a kid with those wings. So,
The wings.
Yeah.
so that
Oh,
we,
you did?
yeah,
In the
so it's really
stowing?
weird. Yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah.
That's
So because you were telling that story, and I thought I had a model plane as a kid. You had to kind of put that together, and it was
Yeah.
really difficult to put together because I had no patience. So the glue would sort of stick to my. You're like, ah, you know. But yeah,
Wow.
it's a famous design.
It is the
Yeah,
stowing. It's
yeah,
very famous.
yeah,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
cool.
my grandpa was actually an airplane mechanic on naval ships.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so wow. So,
So I wish he was still alive. I could ask him, but I'll have to Google his ship and see if they had
Yeah.
stowings on that ship. So
Yeah. Well, the stowing was the design for the wing itself. The
yeah.
mm,
stowing went on to the Hellcat and the Avenger, which were the
Ah, okay.
mm,
planes. Yeah.
Which were the
yeah,
planes. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's amazing.
Oh, cool.
That's really
Wow.
cool. So
Yeah.
you are in a way because of it's so interesting because you in your kind of your background and sort of the family you married into, in a way you represent these two worlds, that
Yeah.
are, and I think that is something that if I look at sort of the patterns that we've seen interviewing people, creatives, innovators, and that's what we see often. People who kind of, they come from or they have experienced different worlds and they connect those.
Mm,
And instead of they're part of one bubble, they're not always the designer or the creative, or no, they're also part of the business world or the academic world or or multiple worlds, really.
right.
And so having sort of that awareness of it, because it's also something you kind of have to kind of then recognize and say, oh wow, there's something in that world that it's actually very useful. And so it's bridging these different worlds. I think that is something that I feel is a is something we don't learn, we don't
Mm-hmm.
teach,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
but and I don't know if if you can call that a skill or not, but I think it should be. And I think it should be something we should teach, to be aware of those things, to be able to say, hey, I'm part of this world, but there's another world out there. That's another reality, and they do things differently. What if I combine that? And that takes, again, permission, courage, whatever, but also just
Right.
an awareness of the fact that, there are all these different worlds out there. If you're an engineer, you have so much to give to the designers because basically, it's such a beautiful combination, really.
Right.
But I grew up in a world where when you're an engineer, you're not a designer, and when you're a designer, you're not an engineer.
Mm,
But at the same time, you're like, wait a minute, are you?
right.
And scientists, the scientific method is all about trial and error,
Right.
right? That's what you do, right? So
Yes.
a lot of the things are similar, but we just don't see it. So we need people to kind of say, "Hey, wait a minute, I can bridge those things," and that space in between. I love that. I think often we feel like a lot of people feel a bit lost because they're not part of a bubble. They don't know where to go. They want to belong to one of these worlds. And I always say, actually, you should realize that actually you are in the right place. This is the place. This is
Yes.
the place in between, not belonging to one of those, but having a foot in all of those. I don't know how
Yes.
many feet you have, but anyway.
I'm an
I've
off.
never
It's
thought
okay.
about that before because the other thing that was happening when my husband and I launched our business, we eventually moved out west. We were both raised on the East. Well, I was raised on the East Coast. David had part of his childhood in the Rocky Mountains out in Colorado Springs and always wanted to get back there. So we moved to Sun Valley, Idaho, which was a beautiful ski resort in the Rocky Mountains. And I entered another new world, right? I entered this world of Western values, Western sensibility that is completely different from the East Coast. And there's a cowboy mentality that doesn't exist on the East Coast. And our business flourished in that environment because there's a different mindset, there's a different way of moving through the world. And I had this sensibility of a Western, you know, mentality and an East Coast mentality. And I could see the value of both and hold both in my head at the same time. So experimentation was so much easier out west because West was built by cowboys. And so, becoming familiar with design and this different language in a place where the behaviors of the people in that place also exhibited those same behaviors must have contributed to my understanding as well. I never thought about it
Yes.
that way, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. For sure. And I think that is so being able to hold two different kind of mindsets, way of sort of experiencing reality, that is I think that's a skill. That is something we should do, because that's also about empathy. It's also about,
Mhm.
being able to
Mhm.
understand other people and accepting there are other realities out there,
Right.
instead of saying it's my reality is this, and so everybody else should kind of, be the same and see the world the same way. And
Right.
it's scary to know that actually there are people who have a completely different understanding of reality, and they see the world's completely different. It's also a bit weird.
Yes.
You go like, well, how is it possible that you think this way? You go like, don't you see?
Yeah.
I explained it to you. Why still? Why?
You understand?
Why
And I
don't
think
you?
And I'm thinking, because I live in The Hague, which is a very, very international city, right? Like, so I kind of walk around with this knowing and this expectation, hey, okay, everyone I bump into and I encounter is going to have their own way of
Mm,
operating, or like it's just kind of default now. And
right.
I'm not as familiar with Colorado Springs, but I lived in Fort Collins for a year, and now my parents live in Grand Junction. But so like this idea that out west is very much a little bit more entrepreneurial. You're kind of this cowboy mentality, right?
Right.
But I also get the feeling when I go back to visit that they think everybody has a bit this mentality, unless you're from the East Coast or the West Coast, because then you're not one of us.
Right.
So also having to find yourself as this person bridging worlds
Yes.
in a land full of cowboys is, it's a little bit different than
Right.
me, because okay, yeah, I'm in a new environment, I'm in a new atmosphere, but I also know that a lot of other people are going through this similar alien feeling experience
Right.
of
Right.
navigating a foreign place. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I know there's friction in town in Sun Valley and Ketchum when East Coasters flock to the city and they expect services to be performed the way they are in a big city.
Yeah.
And you're on Sun Valley time when you're in. Things move a lot slower.
Yep.
And people are
Yeah.
not trying to be difficult, but life moves at a different pace and there's a different culture in place. And so
Yeah.
now they have this amazing campaign just as you enter, which includes lots of posters and wall signage and beautiful art as you enter the city, saying you're on Ketchum time now, just to create some awareness that we move at a different speed than you do.
That's brilliant.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, so travel is important. That to me,
sure
I think
is.
you experiencing different cultures that are very different than your own
That's
Yeah.
right.
is so important.
So
Being,
important.
finding yourself in a place where people don't even speak your language, and
Yeah.
they do think you don't understand, and just
Right.
even knowing it's there, even though you couldn't cope with it, and it was annoying, and it was weird, and it was strange, just knowing it's there, it's already
Right.
such an epiphany, such an eye-opening experience. Like, wait a minute, there's people doing really weird things there. Why? So I think that is skills, like that are created by experience. Again, you can tell that you can tell this to kids. You can show them pictures of it. Okay, maybe they watch a movie, that helps. Read books, that helps. But going there,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, just going there and being part of a community, or just experiencing a community that acts very different than you, and you don't understand what's going on, and still
Right.
they seem perfectly happy.
Right.
Like everything works and you don't know
Yeah.
why. You're like, why is everything working? I don't know how to deal with this. That
Yeah.
is so cool. And in a way, that's, yeah, in a way, if you live in a tiny country like mine in the Netherlands, that experience is quite easy, because I just like I get in my car, like in 2 hours I'm in a country that doesn't speak my language, and they do things differently. They have a different culture, you know. So as a Dutch person, exposure to different cultures is, like, you know, very simple. Everybody gets
Right.
it, basically.
Right.
Even though there are lots of people here who don't, who still kind of, you know, keep them themselves, but it's very difficult here to kind of not get exposed to different cultures. So
Yes.
yeah, so I think I think all kids should somehow travel and see the world, but also adults. So it's never too late. I guess that it's never too late
That's right.
to, yeah, to
And
learn and
But
get exposed.
it sensitizes you to giving someone the benefit of the doubt that they're having a set of experiences that are different from your own, which opens up problem solving spaces and opportunities for action, because then you can serve someone's true needs rather than serving your own needs that you think
Yeah,
they have. Right.
Hmm. Mhm. Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you see the future? What is the what is next? I mean,
What worlds are you bridging right now?
yeah.
Well, I'm spend a lot of my time building capabilities around these skills. And I love that the name of your work is the Future Skills Academy, because I really do think it's all about new skills and new behaviors. You know, these 44 behaviors that we developed ladder up to these 5 skills that we did some factor analysis at UVA about, which are relationship skills, reflection skills, presencing skills,
Mm,
experimentation skills, or we call them scientific reasoning skills, and opportunity seeking skills. And there are a set of behaviors that go along with those skills that can be learned and can also be observed and coached in others. So we talk a lot about mindsets, but mindsets can't be observed. They can't
Mm.
be seen. So skills and behaviors are the markers for a changed mindset. So all of my work now is really about capability building around those 5 skill buckets and the 44 behaviors that are the foundation of those skills that can help problem solvers, innovators, creators create something of real value, because they have become someone new in the process with these new skills that allow them to create the new.
awesome. So you want to come and teach at Future Skills Academy?
Of course. Yes.
All right. It's a deal.
Yes.
That'd be great.
Yes.
That'd
And
be
I'm
awesome.
And we'll
I'm
bring
thinking
Keen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
power duo. And I'm thinking of what you were talking about earlier with like the learning environments. Is there anything that you yourself are learning just for yourself, maybe on the side, not necessarily connected to work, something that you're
Oh,
dipping your
something that
fingers in?
I'm learning. Oh, that's such a good. Well, I'm a hiker. I love to hike, and we do a lot of hiking in Sun Valley. We're going out to Sun Valley for 4th of July. And so I've been practicing. So the mountain that I like to climb is Baldy, which is this big ski mountain. It's a 5.3 mile trek up. It's all uphill. And so I'm practicing. I went on a hike yesterday. I played hooky and went on a hike yesterday. And I'm practicing my breath control, because
Oh.
when you are hiking, your breath can be leveraged for success.
Mm.
And if you don't practice breath control, you can easily get winded when you're hiking the very steep parts, the mountain.
Mhm.
And so, but you can practice breath control, which I've been learning in Pilates how to do. So I'm borrowing my breath control that I've been learning in Pilates and applying it to my hiking. So we'll see. I'll let you know
That's very
how
cool.
successful I am, because it's a long trip. 5.3 miles and 5,000 feet is a big
Ooh.
journey up.
Yes, I
So-
wish my mental conversions were better. I would know what that is in kilometers, and
Yeah, but it's a lot of feet.
it's an impressively large mountain. Yes.
Yeah, and it's a lot of miles. And so we'll see if learning the breath control actually helps in my ascent this time. So I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really love this conversation. That
Oh,
was
me
very,
too.
very, very nice, very insightful. And yeah, I will come back to that teaching thing. Yes. Yeah, that'd be very, very, very nice to see whether we can do something together. That'd be so cool.
Love it.
And
Yeah.
if anybody wants to learn more about the skills that you and Jean worked on, how could they find more information about that?
Well, we developed an assessment along with our partners at Treehouse Innovation. They're an innovation consultancy in London. So we have an online assessment. I'll send you the link for that so that you can send that out to folks.
Yeah.
We have both an individual self-assessment and a peer assessment. So we find that sometimes our answers are more authentic with the peer version of the assessment. But it's an incredible way to create awareness for the skills that are your superpowers and the skills that you have opportunities to more positively impact your team. So I'll send you a link to that. And then, of course, we wrote about all of this in our book, Experiencing Design, The Innovator's Journey, which is available everywhere, as they say.
Yes. Yes. And it's awesome. So that's great. So we'll send out the link, when we publish the podcast as well. So great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being on
Sharon.
the podcast.
Thank you.
All
Loved
right.
it.